Hi, everybody. This is Warren Herman. Tonight, we're going to discuss an important subject about finding the authentic freedom to be the person that you want to be and to overcome and step outside and move beyond the things that are holding you back from the life you want to live. This video is going to share a very subtle shift in perception, and it's going to explain how we can apply this and a number of practices so that you can live out an authentically free lifestyle in Christ and be able to, because of this shift and because of the practices described, understand a lot about how to live out trust and confidence in God. The reason why this is important is because if we don't have these understandings, we can gain a distorted understanding of what it means to trust, a distorted understanding of what it means to believe, a distorted understanding of what it means to forgive. Because of these distorted understandings, you'll think you don't believe, you'll think you don't forgive, and you'll think you don't trust. And there won't be a way forward for you to achieve these things in your life. The shift that I'm describing is very simple. The shift that I'm describing is something that is found even in the scriptures. When we hear verses like, "Lord, I believe, help my unbelief." It is clear that there is a split in our nature. We are double-minded. There is a way in which this is described in the scholastic tradition by people like St. Thomas Aquinas, I believe, when he describes about how Adam and Eve had a kind of dominion over their passions even. Whereas today, we do not have control over what we feel, essentially. We can choose to think differently. We might choose to act differently. But we cannot just with our will have dominion over our feelings, or what we might call in more traditional language, our passions. In the same way, we may have control over the thought that we think at the moment, but not the general thoughts that we've been conditioned to think. We might have control over, what we do, but not over the fact that we have had patterns of behavior. There's a way in which there is a part of us that is conditioned, and a part of us that is not conditioned. And so, what we are talking about here is a critical distinction that we must make in our interior lives in order to find freedom. A distinction that is rooted in an understanding of our fallen human nature. A distinction that is necessary to make, because without making it, we are bound to our mind, bound to our feelings, and incapable of living. We are not even in life because we are wedded to the mind, to who we've been. So we have no authentic freedom to be free, to be able to live in Christ, because we are just stuck as who we've been. This is a critical step, and I want to show you how to think about this. We might describe this step in two ways, and I promise you that this is going somewhere, so I'm going to use some strange language, but I'm going to make it very concrete. So, if you don't make this shift, what's going to happen is you are going to try to trust God, but because of the bad things that have happened to you, you simply can't generate trust because you're you. You just are your baggage. You just have been beaten down. How are you going to generate trust when you've tried, you've stuck your neck out, you believed, and you feel like you've been disappointed? How are you going to feel? How are you going to be able to trust God so that your prayers are answered the next time? It's like, how are you going to do that? You're stuck if you don't understand this principle. How are you going to forgive someone? Your emotions don't forgive them. Your emotions have this kind of pain inside them. How are you going to do that? How are you? And also, if you have feelings come up again, does that mean you didn't forgive them? You're stuck. You're stuck because you think you're you. And then you look. What if you want to? What if you want to be a priest or be a monk or do something radical for Christ? But you're like, hey, nothing else worked out for me. So I'm so beaten down. I'm just choosing this as a way out. That's the way you feel. How are you ever going to be able to generate a how are you ever going to generate a positive, real commitment to God? Because, like, aren't you in prison? Aren't you basically like locked into this situation where, because of the way you've been disappointed, you're only generating thoughts out of disappointment, and you can't really be generous with yourself, offering yourself to God for something great? Whether it's to consecrate yourself to Him, in the religious life, or private vows. You can't do those things because, hey, that's if you psychologically look at yourself, you find this, that you just don't have the hope, and now that's why you're doing it. You're looking at your psyche. What about if you feel like you may be called to the priesthood? You could look, oh, maybe I'm just doing this for this reason, and you look at like all your different psyche, all the movements of your psyche, and you say, wow, I have all these mixed motives. You keep looking and you keep looking, and you say, where's my vocation? Maybe that's not really. You kind of analyze yourself, looking for your vocation to the priesthood, or it's like there's a lot of ways, and you say, okay, well, maybe yes, maybe no, who knows? I mean, some people have a clear thing one way or another, but you kind of analyze yourself. You're looking at yourself, like you're checking your emotions to see if you forgive. You're realizing, you're looking at yourself and be like, wow, I can never trust. You're looking at your mind and saying, wow, I don't believe in God, or I don't believe in the Bible. I can't believe this. I can't believe that guy's a saint. I can't believe it. I can't understand it. Your mind is just not doing it. Your heart's not doing it. Your emotions can't do it. You're stuck, aren't you? Isn't that you? Isn't that all there is to you? And so, isn't it just dishonest? Well, here's the thing. That's not all there is to you. That's the good news of this video. The good news of this video is a very subtle shift, but a shift that can bring you hope instantaneously. A shift that can open up the world for you instantaneously. Because this shift allows you to see something. It allows you to see. I sound like I'm an advertising guy in this video, but it's true. But it's like the shift is this. The shift is when you make an act of the will, your emotions don't matter. What's the real you is the moment of activity rather than the conditioning that's playing in your head. The thought you choose to think is more important than the tape loops that play in your head. That's your conditioning, but your decision, your will, your real you is what you do in the moment. As Nike says, just do it. Or as Yoda says, do or do not. There is no try. The try is the problem. I want to believe in the Bible. I need to believe in the Bible. I don't believe this. I don't believe that. I don't know. I don't know. That's what the mind does. That's conditioning. Conditioning does that. The you that is active, is what Father Narciso Irala talks about, the active state of the mind when the faculties are operating, rather than just the passive state where we're going along with our conditioning. That is more like the real you, in a sense. There is a way in which there is an authentic freedom and a hopefulness which comes when you realize that you don't, in order to believe something, you don't need to convince your conditioned mind to believe it. In order to forgive someone, you don't need to convince your emotions to forgive them. In order to offer yourself for the religious life or something like that, to consecrate yourself to God, you don't need to overcome all the wounds that may have made you do that for a mixed motive. Those things live in the back seat. You are in the front seat. And no matter how much those backseat drivers talk, those backseat drivers are part of you, but not all of you. And so this is an important thing to realize, because if you think that all you are is your baggage, then you're like somebody who's trying to, you're basically trying to launch the space shuttle without a launch pad. There's nothing separating you from the ground. There's nothing, and obviously, this is an important thing to keep in mind. There's things that can go too far with this. You can go the Buddhist direction, and then you just kind of sit on the launch pad and you say, wow, I'm not on the ground anymore. And you think that you're the true self. You think that you are, the true self, and you just observe all the different thoughts and feelings and conditioned things. You say, oh, I am the unconditioned. And you become aware of your mind by being aware of what's going on in your mind, your heart, and all these things. Say, wow, I don't need to do anything about those things because they're not me. And there's some truth to that. That's half true. What's the real truth is that you have a fallen nature. And unfortunately, this is another way to trip into another ditch of your fallen nature. So what you don't want to do that, but you do need to realize, hey, we can't launch this rocket from the ground. The launch pad needs to be there. You can't stick the rocket on just this uneven ground of your mind. You need to set that launch pad there that flattens everything out. And that flatten everything out is this understanding that, wow, look at that. That's your conditioned mind. That's your conditioning that says, I can't believe in Moses. I can't think about this. I don't know about that. I don't know if St. Francis is a saint. I don't know this and that. It's just like this all babble in your head. I don't know this and that. Like just whatever garbage it is in your mind. I'm just, it's whatever thing that your mind is saying, or whatever feelings that come up, like, oh, like I have no hope, or, I can't, pain, emotional pain about things that may have happened, just disappointments about how life turned out. Those things are part of you, but they're not all of you. That's not the ground from which you need to launch the acts of the will. To have authentic freedom, we have to understand those things to be conditioned and to simply notice that those things are conditioned. So that's really the main step that begins this process, is the noticing that those things are a conditioned pattern. This is very important. So when you notice that those things are a conditioned pattern, you then have this freedom to be able to do things. So for example, let's take trust. And we're going to study this a little more in depth using the issue of trust. But actually, let me do this. Before we go into the issue of trust, I'm going to mention forgiveness. Because Martin Luther King has an excellent quote where he says, God said to love your enemies, not like your enemies. And this quote perfectly dovetails with what we've been saying so far in this video. Because liking your enemies is something that happens in your emotions. You don't have any control over who you like. That's what your emotions do. But love, he says, is greater than like. Love is something that happens in the will. Love is willing the good of the other. Because you can't make yourself like your enemies, but you can wish good on them. So this is what's so important, because if you think that loving your enemies is figuring out how to like them and not have any pain about what they did, then you think you're a failure. If you think that trusting in God is psyching yourself up out of all of your disappointments, you are a failure because you can't do it. Trusting in God, I believe, is just much more akin to a surrender. And we're going to explain that in a moment, because here's what we're going to do. Let's go in depth with the issue of trust, applying this principle. Because the whole principle we're talking about here is a focus on the faculties of the mind, realizing that the faculties come first, rather than trying to somehow psych ourselves up and change our lower passions so that we feel a certain way. The feeling comes as a byproduct, if at all, from the work we do with our faculties. So let's get down to business with this. So the first thing to realize is that this is like a chart we're going to go through. How are we going to trust God? This is an example of this principle, because if we're just trying to psych ourselves up, we might have despair. Our conditioning may just be like, I don't have any hope. No hope at all. That's all there is to it. So, and you don't think it's going to work. Well, how are you going to get God how are you going to have confidence in God and, have faith that'll move mountains and all that stuff if you just, I'm dead. That's just how you are. That's how you feel. So how are we going to get out of it? Well, here's a few things. The faith, the trust that we have in God, for example, has to be rooted in the sacraments. And let's just kind of classify all these things, that there's an active side and a passive side. So, for example, on the passive side of sacraments, we have a thing like baptism or confession, which brings us into friendship with God. And on the active side, we have something like the Eucharist, in which we truly receive God, his blood, his body, blood, soul, and divinity. But then we have the next level. This is really important for trust, because here's the root of it. I mean, obviously, the sacraments are something that is the true root, because we have this principle of, I think I'm going to say it wrong in Latin, it's something like ex operare operatio or something like that, meaning, the sacraments they're effective at doing what they do. It always works. So the thing is, like, you could trust in that. That's the foundation. But here's the next level. The next level down from that is the level of prayer. And, prayer is made up of the kind of active acts that we may make in an active way, like asking for something, but also with trust. And this is the most important thing we could know about trust, I think, because trust has to be akin to a surrender. an abandonment to divine providence, rather than a psyching ourselves up that, like, yeah, I have faith, it's going to happen for me. We can't do it that way. We just have to let go. Because the psyching ourselves up is involving ourselves in our lower passions and trying to make our the lower part of our soul the ground of everything, making our feelings and everything the ground of everything. And that's not what this is all about. It's an act of abandonment, of just letting go, turning it over to God, trusting in God, and praying. Trust in the Lord and do good is a very interesting phrase from the Bible. And it's a good analogy here, meaning we should trust and pray. The next thing we should be doing is we can have, we could have different types of thoughts. And I might be getting this a little bit wrong in this chart, but we'll fix it later maybe. Certainly part of the thinking then can be trusting that God is going to do things for us. Just thinking that, yeah, he's going to do this. But that has to come after we have the grounding of the sacraments and after we have this grounding of surrender and trust. If we make the mistake of just kind of putting ourselves there, we end up in the error of the prosperity gospel. If we want to redeem these things, we can look to people like Father Cedric Passedia and people like that. And there's a lot of different ways we can try to fix this type of positive thinking stuff. But there's something to it. We want to have thoughts that, maybe on the passive side can simply be affirmations of who God is and who we are to him. And that's good stuff. And then we can have kind of this kind of possibility thinking, more akin to like what Reverend Robert Schuller talked about, where we kind of expect that God is going to do something. But we're thinking, yeah, he's going to do it. He's going to do that. We're kind of encouraging ourselves. But of course, we don't want to fall into the kind of some of the philosophical and spiritual errors that are in these movements and in these teachings. Some of the things with Schuller are kind of somewhat new thought-ish. That's a technical term for a type of esoteric Christianity. But I don't recommend that. But there's an element of truth, too, that we need to have this kind of positive thinking in a sense. But we need to have some modifications on it. But the thing is, it will get exhausted if we are not rooted in the sacraments and if we are not rooted in surrender and trust and prayer. The prayer itself will also be exhausting if it's not rooted in trust. Then we can have things like, if we are going to go to the level of the will, we can make resolutions to do things and then make efforts to do things. And at those, that's also part of our trust in God. Stepping out actively. But the foundation, of course, is this trust that comes from trust. It has to be rooted in the sacraments. It has to be ordered, because or else if we just make resolutions and efforts without trust, we will become exhausted. Then we can also have things like... I made a strange thing. Okay, we can have... So, for example, we can use our imagination. We can imagine things that you can remind ourselves of, things that God did in the Bible, imagining those things, or remembering things that God did for us in the past. And even imagining things that God's going to do for us in the future. Of course, we can't use this as a way to kind of manipulate reality directly, but there's a way in which this can be part of our confidence in God. So that's a way in which we can kind of use our imagination to increase our confidence in God. We also can have a kind of, in the passive sense, we could have kind of an openness to what's happening in the present moment. And there may also be, in an active sense, a need to focus on the present moment in order to get out of, rumination or, mistrust or these kind of other mental states. And the ultimate thing that we're going for here is an orientation toward the passions, which we've been discussing, the active and passive use of the faculties. But ultimately, these are part of an active and passive orientation toward the passions. Because ultimately what we need to do is realize that we're not trying to act from our passions or to change them. We're not trying to change our mind, change our feelings, or anything like that. We're not even trying to change our mind. We're not even trying to change our feelings. We're simply planting seeds in our mind and in our feelings as if these are a field. Because we know that in a way there is a separation because of our fallen nature between the superior and inferior parts of our soul. Not a total separation, but one that if we don't know about it, we will act, as we spoke about earlier in the video, in a type of bondage that keeps us trapped in our lives. So, what does this look like? This looks like putting things in God's hands rather than trying to psych ourselves up into belief. It's an ordered way of approaching our problems. Because if we have this type of mindset, for example, in this, I mean, there might be other ways we could talk about. We talked about trust in this video, but if we applied it to belief or forgiveness, I might be able to make another list of, active and passive things at various levels of the faculties and how they impact the passions. I might be able to make a different diagram there, or a different set of practices. But again, think about this. At the level of the sacraments, we want to either be baptized or go to confession at the passive side and receive the Eucharist on the active side. On the passive side of the heart and prayer, we're going to be trusting, and on the active side, praying. On the passive side of thinking, we're going to be thinking uplifting things about ourselves and God, or about our identity in Christ and who God is. And on the active side, we're going to be thinking, what can he do in our lives? What can I do with God's help? On the passive side of resolutions, we'll build those resolutions to kind of step out and do things. And then we'll make efforts based on these trusts, although that's with the will. Then with the imagination, I'm going to imagine things God has done for me in the past, or maybe in the scriptures. I'm going to remember these things. And then I'm also going to imagine things going well for me in the future, or even in the age to come. We can obviously apply this in a gospel way. It doesn't have to be, I'm going to make tons of money. It could be, wow, I'm going to be a martyr. It could be whatever it is. Then with the use of attention, we're going to be open to what's happening in the gifts of the present moment, seeing his providence all around us, or focusing on the present moment when, we're keeping our focus there actively. Openness and focus. And ultimately, this is an orientation toward realizing that we're not trying to change our mind. We're trying to directly. We're just planting seeds. We're just noticing that our mind is not all there is to us, and then planting the seeds through these practices so that we have trust. So this is a very important orientation toward life. It's ultimately about understanding our human nature. A lot of this is based off of models of the person and the mental functioning from Father Narciso Irala, but there are differences that I've kind of mushed in there. So hopefully this is helpful in two things. Giving you, number one, authentic freedom. Understanding that this split in ourselves is the key to freedom, because we are launching the rocket from the launch pad, rather than trying to launch the rocket from the ground of our conditioning. We're doing things with the knowledge that if we make an act of trust, that's enough. That's trust. If we, with our real mind, believe something, that's belief. It's not that, I have to convince my whole unconscious mind to believe in the Bible, or I have to make all of my emotions forgive the person. No, you make an act of the will. You think a good thought. You pray for the person. That's success. And that gives us hope, because these are things we can do rather than things we can't do. So this elevates us beyond this despair and hopelessness of believing ourselves to be only our conditioning and to be bound by it and wedded to it entirely. So that is something I hope will be helpful in your spiritual life. And that, really what we are is the faculties, and we gave those examples of using those faculties in the issue of trust, for example. We focused in there. That's how you would use your faculties. That's you. If you do those things, you're trusting God. It's not that you have to convince I have to convince all this despair in my psyche. That's not your job. Just notice that that's not you entirely. Plant the seeds. Eventually it'll change, and who cares if it does? Because the thing that really counts is what you do with your faculties, not what your passions are saying. And this is really important, or else you're going to fall into despair. So, because you can't control your passions, so you're just trying to do an impossible thing. So I hope this is really helpful to you in your quest to find authentic freedom, and trust in God, especially, is what we focused on also. So hopefully this is helpful. Again, this is Warren Herman, and I hope you have a great day.